in about a minute. So we'll be starting in about a minute. If you could just be mindful of the empty seats between you. We do have a full house today, so if you wouldn't mind just filling in the empty seats behind you so that everyone can have access to a seat. Thank you very much.
It looks at me hard. That means I should go do something. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. My name is Julia Hannigsberg. I'm the President and CEO here at Holland Bloorview Kids Rehabilitation Hospital, and it is my great honor and privilege to welcome you to this year's Bloorview Research Institute Symposium, one of the best days of my calendar, and I'm sure one of the best days of all of your calendars as well. I want to start our proceedings with a land acknowledgement. I'm not sure that everybody knows what a land acknowledgement is and what the purpose of it is. A land acknowledgement is an opportunity, it's a gesture of reconciliation and a meaningful gesture. And my friend Ruth, who among other things is the President's Advisor at York University on Indigenous Affairs, always reinforces that a land acknowledgement is also an opportunity for teaching. So it's not a recital of words either on a page or memorized, but it's an opportunity to share and to teach. And I once was talking to her, I guess last year, about what we as settlers, what does it mean for we as settlers to do a land acknowledgement or to participate in a land acknowledgement. And she shared with me that it is not only appropriate, but particularly important because in a land acknowledgement, among other things, we talk about treaty lands, and these are treaties between settlers and First Nations. And so we're contractual parties to those treaties, and important for us to be sharing the meaning of those treaties and the acknowledgement that we work, play, learn, conduct research, engage in artistic activities and scholarly activities, all on these lands that have been continuously occupied for over 15,000 years. These are lands that have been the traditional territories of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this place is a meeting place of many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. Many Indigenous peoples, most Indigenous peoples, when they introduce themselves, will introduce themselves in the context of the territorial lands from which they come or on which they live. And most recently, when I was at a conference that was put on by Health Quality Ontario, the person who started that conference shared, as a settler, her view and her learning that it was important for settlers to similarly share their identities in that way. So I wanted to do that. It's the first time I've done that. So we're better than the Bloorview Research Institute, where we learn together, for me to do that. So my own identity is a settler woman, and I was born in the lands that are party to the Chicago Treaty. Those are lands near Evanston, Illinois in the US. It was a treaty made between the United States of America and the Council of Three First Native American peoples. I then came and spent most of my growing up in the area we now call Montreal, but that was the traditional lands of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations. I'm very grateful to be able to be here with you today, to be able to share that learning and that land acknowledgement. You will hear more shortly from our co-conveners of the Bloorview Research Institute about the amazing program ahead of you. It is truly an exceptional day with something for everybody and every interest. But one in particular that I want to call your attention is to a breakout session that will be led by Dr. Angela Mashford-Pringle. Dr. Mashford-Pringle is an assistant professor and associate director at the Wakanabines Bryce Institute for Indigenous Health. She's an urban Algonquin woman from Temiskaming First Nation in northern Quebec. During her breakout session, Dr. Mashford-Pringle will introduce participants to Indigenous research methodologies and facilitate a discussion around strategies and insights to support collaborations and partnerships with Indigenous scholars and Indigenous communities. We are very pleased and honored to have Dr. Mashford-Pringle with us today to share her knowledge and insights with our research community, and I know that will be one of our terrific sessions. So in my role as President and CEO of Holland Bloorview, I get to walk the halls every day and hear from the children and youth and the families that we serve about their gratitude for the care that they receive and for the impact of the research that happens here on that care and on their lives. Indeed, we have accomplished a great deal since the Bloorview Research Institute was founded in 2004, so we are a very young research institute still. Despite that, for 7 years in a row, we are a Canada Top 40 research hospital, and our leadership in childhood disability research positions ourselves and the Bloorview Research Institute to address the real-life needs and challenges of children and families in the 21st century, to ensure that they have the care, the opportunities and the knowledge that will make their lives everything they ought to be. And these are findings that will be impactful not only here at Holland Bloorview, of course, across our province, across our country, and around the globe. So, as such, it is fitting that the theme of this year's symposium is advancing the global impact of childhood disability research. And for over a decade, the BRI, the Bloorview Research Institute, has been developing breakthroughs and revolutionary advances in pediatric disability that have impacted an enormous number of families, and we're tremendously proud of that. We're also in the second year of our new strategy, the No Boundaries strategy. And the No Boundaries strategy is intended to advance our mission, which is the most meaningful and healthy futures for all children, youth, and families. And we do that through 3 impact areas of our strategy: connect the system, personalized pathways, and the one most relevant to today's events, Discover for Action. And we're doing important work in all of these areas, but the Research Symposium is a great opportunity to showcase the work in the area of Discover for Action. Today, you will learn about those groundbreaking discoveries and advances in childhood disability across the continuum of care that will change the way we perceive and provide care and treatment for kids and families now and into the future. Our families, scientists, researchers, and trainees exemplify courage, compassion, excellence, and innovation to drive world-class research and discoveries that create a more inclusive and stronger healthcare system, but also eliminate stigma and barriers faced by people with disabilities. We know that there is so much more to the lives of children and families than what happens in the healthcare system, and that impacting the lives across all areas is what will really make the greatest difference. Today, we're working to transform the way that childhood disability research is conducted for a future of no boundaries for all. It will be my pleasure later this afternoon to welcome the Honorable Christine Elliott back to Holland Bloorview again. She is the Minister of Health and Long-Term Care, and we are very pleased that she is sharing some time with us this afternoon. And also we'll be joined by the Honorable Raymond Chow, who is the Minister for Seniors and Accessibility. And I know that they're both delighted to be here. I wish you all a very inspiring day, great learning, and it's my pleasure to now invite up to the podium my colleague and friend, Dr. Tom Chow.
Thank you, Julia, for those opening remarks. We are so grateful for your visionary leadership and enduring support of research. Good morning, everyone. As Vice President of Research at Holland Bloorview, I'm thrilled to welcome you to the 13th Annual Bloorview Research Institute Symposium. A pearl of wisdom, a celestial arc, a profile of success, communal populations, propelling to the future, a spark of hope, a blazing trail, connection between parent and child, the evergreen of cedar, a heart full of love. These future-focused, strength-based words so happen to be at the core of the nomenclature of the labs here at Holland Bloorview. The Pearl Lab, the ARC Lab, the Profile Lab, Population Neuroscience Lab, Propel Lab, Spark Lab, Trail Lab, Connect Lab, CEDARS Lab, Heart Lab. I think these names speak to the special brand of human-centered science to which we ascribe, and may I boldly say, define in many circles. I'm going to go off script for just a moment. The scientists and investigators, clinical investigators in the room, would you mind just raising your hand for just one moment? And friends and colleagues, if you look around the room, I dare say that never before has our world witnessed such a collection of minds with a combination of brilliance and dedication to drive change for the future. I want to thank the scientists and investigators for your daily contributions and sacrifices to realize the most meaningful and healthy futures for our children and youth. Today, we showcase the best in childhood disability research and the strength of partnerships with families throughout the discovery process. The anticipated growth of the Bloorview Research Institute over the next 5 years means even more opportunities for our families to inform our research. Pairing lived experiences and science continues to remain integral to our research philosophy to ensure the most meaningful and healthy futures for all children and youth. Today's event is special in several ways. Of course, it's an annual time to celebrate and recognize the work of our brilliant scientists, clinical investigators, trainees, families, and research staff. Today, we also have several artistic elements interwoven throughout our program to highlight the importance of arts in healthcare. Many thanks to Dr. Fiona Mula and Joseph Canizaro. We're pleased to welcome a Canadian-born dancer with a disability who will give special performance later this afternoon. As well, I would like to encourage you to visit a fascinating mini art gallery, Telling My Tale, that seeks to disrupt the silos between healthcare and art. The gallery features original works of art by young people with disabilities and chronic illnesses from Holland Bloorview and the community at large. It is located across the hallway in the music therapy room. You don't want to miss it. We're honored also to welcome our distinguished keynote for the Mickey Milner International Professional Lectureship, Professor Christine Eames, who joins us today from Australia. We are thrilled to introduce a new feature this year, the breakout sessions, as Julia alluded to, which is a new feature of our symposium. Each session will be an opportunity to explore a particular research-related topic. Importantly, we invite you to share your voice on Twitter via our hashtag, which you can find on the cover of your symposium program. I would now like to introduce my co-host for today, Beth Dangerfield, who is a family leader and a family partnership specialist here at Holland Bloorview. Beth has made significant impact through her work on Holland Bloorview's anti-stigma campaign called Dear Everybody and our Teaching and Learning Day planning committees. Beth has also been assisting with orienting new staff to client and family integrated care and was involved in this year's ward summer student orientation. Outside of the hospital, Beth is also a grant reviewer with the Rare Disease Foundation microgrant program. We are honored to have Beth with us today. Beth will now say a few words.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Tom. And I, too, am feeling extremely honored to be here with everybody today. I have been a family partnership specialist since August, and before that, I was a volunteer family leader here at Holland Bloorview. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about my family. Yeah. Maybe. So, I am a very proud mom. Those of you that know me know how proud I am of my amazing little girl named Abby. She's 7.5 years old. Abby attended the Integrated Education and Therapy program at Bloorview School from junior kindergarten to grade 1. She's now in grade 2 in a community school. Oh, there we are. Abby's favorite subjects, like her mom, are gym and art. And her classmates and her teachers call her the little mother because of her nurturing and her helpful nature. So shortly after Abby was born, she unexpectedly had cardiac arrest. Following this crisis and a very difficult month in the NICU, Abby was diagnosed with an ultra-rare metabolic disease called LCHAD, which is short for long-chain hydroxyacyl-CoA dehydrogenase deficiency, which is a disorder of fat oxidation. Her body cannot metabolize long-chain fats. Abby recovered remarkably well from a very, very scary start to her life, but was still left with developmental challenges as a result of her early trauma. Abby receives services at Holland Bloorview's Communication and Writing Aids Department. She's seen in the Child Development Clinic and the Dentistry Department. She is currently doing soccer here and has also done swimming, music therapy, and attended Spiral Garden Camp in the summer. From a very, very young age, Holland Bloorview has offered Abby the opportunity to just be a kid, to have fun, to feel included, to make friends, and to learn new skills in an environment where she feels safe, where she feels loved, and where she feels accepted. So for this, I will always be very, very grateful. I'm excited to be your co-host today with Dr. Chow. We have a full, rich agenda of inspiring research talks and quick hits, a record number of which are presented and co-presented by our families. And we have the amazing Emily Chan, a youth leader, advocate, and researcher, joining us later this afternoon to share her lived experience and advice for what we should be thinking of when taking our research to the next global level. I'd like to draw your attention to our program. In it, you will find 2 inserts. One is a research study from our lay summary project, which aims to bring research into the hands of those that need it most and strengthen our efforts to authentically and meaningfully engage families. The lay summary project is a true example of the family voice engaged at every step of the research process, one of the key takeaways of this year's symposium. Our lay summaries will be available online in the months to come. Second, the People's Choice Poster Award. Please participate, and this is the ballot right here. Please participate in the nomination of this important award hosted by our amazing Evidence to Care team. I see you sitting over there. A voting ballot is enclosed in your program right here, and we will provide more information on how to vote later this morning. Every day I am reminded of what's possible for the Bloorview Research Institute, of the potential for life-changing opportunities, not just for my daughter and my family, but for so many of the kids we know and for their families. There is no limit to what we can achieve when we bring together the lived experience perspectives of our families and the scientific expertise of our incredible research teams. In my time as family partnership specialist and family leader, I've come to realize the value, contribution, and ingenuity of our trainees. I feel very strongly that our trainees are one of our most valuable assets. The trainees I have met so far have the brightest minds and the biggest hearts. Already, they are focused on research that matters most to families and research experiences that are client and family oriented. If our trainees are any indication of the leaders of tomorrow's research, we're in extremely good hands. We know that family engagement makes our research relevant. That when our families help identify research priorities, it will have the most influence and impact in our kids' and families' lives. We also know that to realize the full benefit of our families' insight, they must be engaged at every stage of the research process. I feel very privileged to work for an organization that embodies this philosophy and is leading the way to realize a future where families are a crucial part of every research team. I'm really looking forward to today, to recognize and celebrate research, family engagement in research, and all the ways we're working together to strive towards meaningful changes in the lives of kids, youth, and families with disability. So with this, we will now move into today's research talks. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. I'd now like to kick off the symposium with our Mickey Milner International Professorship Lecture. It's an honor and distinct pleasure to welcome Dr. Christine Eames as our scientific keynote speaker. Her talk, Living a Good Life, How Participation Research is Challenging Our Childhood Disability Foci, will undoubtedly provoke self and social reflection and perhaps change. Dr. Eames is joining us today from Australia. First, a bit of background about the professorship. The lectureship is named after Dr. Mickey Milner, who was the first Vice President of Research and Rehab Engineering at what was then called the Bloorview Macmillan Center. Dr. Milner is one of the world's best known and mostly highly respected rehabilitation engineers. He has trained a generation of rehabilitation engineers, modeling the integration of research and clinical practice long before we had the vernacular to describe such activities. We are so thrilled to have a pioneer of rehabilitation science, Dr. Milner, in our presence today. Dr. Eames, our 2018 Mickey Milner keynote, is a professor of occupational therapy, the inaugural national head of the School of Allied Health, and co-founding director of the Center for Disability and Development Research at the Australian Catholic University. Dr. Eames has a long-standing interest in understanding participation outcomes of those with childhood onset neurodisability. Using a range of methods and approaches, her research has predominantly involved children and young people with cerebral palsy and has focused on describing patterns of participation, developing measures, designing and testing interventions of relevance to occupational therapy practice, and much more. We are thrilled to welcome Dr. Eames to the stage.
Good morning, everyone. It's an absolute thrill to be here. Some water. I would like to start by respectfully acknowledging the lands on which we are meeting today. In Australia, we would say that we acknowledge the traditional elders of the lands on which we meet and thank them for their custodianship. Okay. I would also like to begin by thanking Tom for his invitation and say how much I enjoyed meeting Professor Mickey Milner this morning. And I hope you enjoy the photo that I received to share. Reading your biography, Mickey, has been inspiring, and I'm really honoured to be providing this lectureship in your name, and I hope I can do it justice. I also need to acknowledge the amazing people who let me collaborate with them. I almost never do research on my own. I love multidisciplinary collaboration because I learn so much, and the outcomes are more likely to be meaningful and useful for those people who matter. So, today I want to talk about looking to the future and about crafting a preferred future through participation. When my eldest son was 3, we were out sailing one day with a friend. It was a cool day in Hobart, and we had been trickling down the river under sail, playing with his toys, chatting, and generally being very relaxed. For some reason, our friend turned to Tyson and asked him, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And Tyson thought briefly and then said, "A pair of binoculars." Well, we thought, that's very far-sighted of you. Now, I'm pleased to say that Tyson is not a pair of binoculars. And the idea, though, of wondering and planning for what children will be when they grow up is particularly pertinent to today's conversation. The proposition for today is that if we want to create meaningful and healthy futures for all those living with disabilities, we need to take a far-sighted, lifelong perspective in all our work. Creating a preferred future implies vision, thoughtfulness, and actions. To craft something requires knowledge and skills that are developed over time. To craft a future for ourselves or to contribute to crafting somebody else's future means we need to think and act creatively and thoughtfully. It means we need to ask ourselves, what is my role as a health professional in the crafting or creating of a preferred future for those living with disability? So where does participation fit into all this? And why do I care so much about participation? It is because I care about the lives of the children, youth and adults with childhood onset disability and their families. Like everyone else, I hope and plan that they will live a good life with few regrets. I think that living a good life means their lives will be characterised by happiness, good health, and positive development towards a preferred future. And I would argue that participation is the engine for all three. So what is participation? Can you see the faces of these two boys and their sisters playing on the beach? Who's playing here? Who's participating? What's the difference? This is a swimming lesson, and Chris has decided it's better to be under the water than listening to the instructions. Is he participating? If so, in what? Oliver's going home from a day from school. He does this all by himself. Is he participating? And here's Matthew, holding hands with a coach, looking at what's going on further down the Australian rules football field. What about him? If each of these images show participation, and I think they do, what are we looking at? And how do we make it happen? Or not happen if you're one of the girls on the beach? I have 3 messages for you today. The first is that participation research provides a genuinely different view and focus in childhood onset disability, but it isn't always easy to see how. And we need a common way to understand what we mean when we communicate about it, because it's a complex idea. The second point I want to make is that participation research seems to be coming of age, but there's still more to do. The scope of our research as of today provides us with an opportunity to put preferred futures in the spotlight of our work. So I'll spend some time talking about what we know now and what I still don't know. You might know it, but I don't yet. And my third point is that a good life is participatory. So we need to start there if we want to end there. Creating meaningful and healthy futures is everyone's responsibility, and it's happening all the time when you're busy doing other stuff. And if we aren't paying attention to what we're doing as health professionals, we might be getting in the way instead of helping. So, to my first point, participation is a complex idea. Now, the notion of participation has a long history, but it came to the fore in our health and rehabilitation literature and in our thinking with the publication of the ICF in 2001. And at that time, participation was defined as involvement in a life situation, which is fantastic and a very welcome improvement on the notion of handicap, which was the construct in the prior model. So while ICF defined participation as involvement in a life situation and activity as execution of a task or action by an individual, the classification system provided only one set of chapters or codes plus qualifiers. And in 2001, the ICF authors acknowledged that it's difficult to distinguish between activities and participation on the basis of the domains, in other words, the life situations. To help us distinguish between activities and participation, they gave us 4 choices. Now, choice is a marvellous thing, and usually I'm all for it. Being able to choose my own fruit, my own wine, my own husband, I like all those things. But let's see how this particular opportunity to choose worked out. So, since publication of the ICF in 2001, I, along with many, many other people, including people in this room, have been researching participation. My research history in the area includes a longitudinal study, qualitative studies of participation experiences and hopes, pilot intervention studies, and a series of systematic reviews. Since 2001, international research has mapped participation patterns, barriers, facilitators, and provided emergent research around intervention. Since 2001, there's been a lot of discussion about the difference between activity and participation. So, by 2014, we were continuing to see varying approaches to studying and particularly measuring participation. And at that time, we thought that a review of intervention studies would assist with clarifying the concept. Now, our rationale was that if researchers were trying to change participation, then they would have a clear definition of the construct and carefully selected measures. So from a structured systematic review of intervention research in childhood, we thought we would find our answer. So what we found, that there was few studies, there were only 7 RCTs, and of these, only three, showed a positive effect on participation outcomes. And the review also showed us high variability in how participation was being conceived and studied. And we did not get the clarity that we sought around the definition or the measurement. So we went back and using the full intervention study dataset instead of just the RCTs, we undertook a qualitative conceptual analysis of the language used in this intervention research. We extracted all the text in the papers where the authors referred to or discussed participation. And we did that qualitative analysis, and we found 6 themes. These were attendance, involvement, activity competence, sense of self, preferences, and environment. From the thematic analysis, we determined that only attendance and involvement represented the participation construct. Preferences, sense of self, and activity competence were determined to be aspects of the person, not participation. And the environment was, well, it's the environment. So using these themes, the family of participation and related constructs was developed to identify how the constructs might relate to each other. And in this framework, you can see that attendance can lead to involvement, and with involvement comes the potential for activity competence to develop, which might influence your sense of self and then your preferences, which might drive further participation. And so we saw that the extrinsic factors of the environment influence participation opportunities, and those intrinsic factors were both precursors to and outcomes of participation, attendance, and involvement. So importantly, at the end of this review, we had a definition of participation, and it was consistent with the ICF's definition, but we identified that there were 2 essential elements. Attendance, defined as being there, measured as frequency of attending or the range or diversity of activities that you do, and involvement, defined from this analysis as the experience of participation while attending. And that included elements of engagement, persistence, perhaps social connection and affect. So the original framework came from the review and was derived from that empirical work of researchers in childhood disability, but it needed more thinking. So then we did a conceptual review, and we aimed to use current knowledge to examine and further develop the theoretical framework to try and give us some more clarity around what we were doing. And this work moved us from that image to this one, hopefully. Now, I'm going to build the framework for you now so that you can see the language that is here and the definitions and the intent of the framework's constructs. So we start with the environment. Maybe talk away, there it is. So we start with the environment. All participation is situated within an environment defined as the broad, objective, physical and social structures in which we live. The environment, however, also has a perceived or subjective element, defined by Maxwell and colleagues as the sense to which it is experienced as available, accessible, affordable, and that's money, time, effort and energy, accommodating, and the extent to which the accommodations that are made are acceptable to the individual and others in the situation. When we think about the two elements or dimensions of participation, it's likely that the extent to which environments are available and accessible and affordable influences attendance, and the accommodations and the acceptability of them probably influences involvement. So in our broad environments, we operate within a closer context. And using Beata Beatowitz's work, we describe the close setting for activity as being constructed by place, people, objects, activity and time. And now we put in participation, which I have said is comprised of two elements, being there, attendance, and attendance is a necessary but not sufficient construct for involvement. So you have to be there to be involved, but you might not be involved even if you are there. So involvement is defined from our analysis, as I've already described. The within-person factors are activity competence, defined as the ability to execute the activity to an expected standard, sense of self, which includes self-perceptions of confidence, satisfaction and self-determination, and preferences, which are the interests or the activities that hold meaning or are valued. These within-person factors are influenced by participation and in turn influence future participation. They're important to participation, but they are not participation. The person in the model portrays a general self-regulating process that binds those intrapersonal processes. Self-regulation is defined as the executive processes that direct and monitor thinking, emotions and actions. And so these shapes, or blobs as I call them, are the core concepts in the framework. But we've also considered how they might relate to each other. And the family of participation-related constructs is a transactional framework in which we hypothesise a range of transactional exchanges among the constructs. Between participation and activity competence are processes of acting and learning. Competence is an outcome of actions, for example, learning skills over time through participation. And it's also a predictor or an enabler of future participation. Between sense of self and participation, we hypothesise processes of engaging and perceiving. Sense of self evolves as a result of perceptions of your experiences. The processes between preference and participation are choosing and complying. Children choose a preferred activity or comply or cope with choices made by others based on past experiences or expectations for future participation. The processes within the intrinsic constructs are also important. The individual experiences a sense of competence, or not, which colours their sense of self as someone who acts in the world to achieve a goal. Between sense of self and preference is the act of interpreting, the interpretation of past or current experiences in relation to the sense of self, and competence influences the development of preferences. It's through the experience and the interpretation of the experience that preferences are formed. The family of participation-related constructs also considers processes between the environment and context and person. The environment and context are seen as providing or regulating opportunities for participation, and the individual is seen as responding and influencing the context or environment. So there's a transactional influence, and both are changed. So there are some key points here to make about the distinction between the family of participation-related constructs and the ICF. First, participation is separated from the life situation conceptually. So this means that participation can be considered in relation to any activity or life situation according to the cultural or personal circumstances of the individual or group. Second, Participation is separated from activity competence conceptually. Activity competence, capacity, capability and performance are all important in their own right, but they're not the same as participation. This fundamental distinction is extremely important, especially for those with more complex impairments who may have severe activity limitations. They can still be enabled to participate, and their participation should not be penalised or thought less of because of activity limitations. Third, change is understood to be transactional, as described by the bidirectional arrows, and this is consistent with the ICF, but the family of participation-related constructs highlights and values the transactions as the focus of interest. So my message is that participation is a complex idea, and to study it effectively, we need clarity of language, definitions, and shared understandings of what is and is not in scope. And we hope that the family of participation-related constructs might help with this clarity. So, having pulled it all apart into separate shapes, no longer boxes and circles, I want to emphasise that the family of participation-related constructs is a family of participation-related constructs that represent a dynamic system of interrelated constructs and transactional processes. Participation cannot be considered in isolation. In fact, it's pretty difficult to cease participating because participating is living. The question is, do all people have an equal chance to participate in activities of importance and that hold meaning? Because it's a family of participation-related constructs that interact in multidimensional ways, we understand that there are multiple ways of achieving the same outcomes and that there are multiple outcomes can be achieved using the same means. So I want to talk a little bit about the research that investigates participation as ends and participation as means. For a long time now, perhaps forever, Health and Human Services have provided a broad range of interventions with the ultimate goal of improved participation. That is, participation is seen as the desired outcome. And although not universally true, in paediatric rehabilitation, we've remained predominantly interested in improving body structures and functions and activity performance as the way to change participation, with limited effect. But we need to, and we are, changing our perspective. I have 3 examples of interventions focused on intervening at the point of transaction between the environment and the person, with the goal of improved participation. The first is Canadian. The Pathways and Resources for Engagement and Participation, the PREP program, designed and tested by Dana Anaby and her team. PREP aims to increase participation by removing barriers and coaching youth and parents. It's a 12-week intervention, beautifully summarised using the schematic. Set goals, make a plan, make it happen, measure processes and outcomes, move forward to the next goal. Evidence to date is positive, with a demonstration of increased frequency of participation, a measure of attendance, and in 2018 demonstrated positive goal achievement using the COPM. My second example is FitSkills, developed by Nora Shields in Australia. FitSkills is a student-mentored, community-based exercise program that aims to increase physical fitness and ongoing participation in community exercise. There are 2 key elements. There's the matching of a university student mentor with the adolescent, and they exercise together at a local gym. This is also a 12-week program. The mentor provides social support. They're not a personal trainer. The pair train together. It's an individually tailored program with transition planning for participation at the end of the mentoring component. And outcomes so far show that improved fitness, 50% have maintained their community participation following the end of the mentoring program. And we're now translating and further testing this program across universities and YMCAs in Melbourne. My third example is Jessica Kramer's project Team, Teens Making Environment and Activity Modifications, developed in the US. Project Team takes an approach of teaching youth with intellectual impairments to identify a participation goal, to develop a plan, to identify barriers and strategies pertinent to them, to implement their plan and check if their plan worked. Goal, plan, do, check. The program also teaches 5 key modification strategies: planning ahead, teaching others about disability, using things differently, doing activities differently, and changing spaces. Do it somewhere else. Outcomes to date are positive. So these 3 examples of interventions were specifically designed to promote participation in community by intervening at the transaction between the environment and the person. They did not aim to change the body structures to change participation. And although skills were undoubtedly learned, the focus of skill learning was not on doing the activity itself, but on negotiating the environment. And from these and other related examples, some of the effective ingredients for improving participation as ends can be distilled. First, they involve individualised, personally meaningful participation goal setting, attendance and involvement goal setting. The intervention occurs in context, in the activity settings that are safe, provide learning, and support the individual's family. Coaching or mentoring is provided. The therapist coaches the individual or family rather than doing for or doing to, and a peer mentor works with. There's solution-focused environmental or activity adaptation that is negotiated, and a skilled facilitator is available. And finally, there's a carefully chosen, tailored, multiple strategy approach that is taken within a structured framework. So, what about participation as means? When we think about participation as means, we are saying that attendance and involvement are the intervention. They are the means to other outcomes and future participation. When we situate participation as the means, then we focus on the transactions as the mechanism of effect. Transactions are the bidirectional influence of person and environment that loop in cycles over time. Because both person and environment are always implicated in a transaction, it's important to consider aspects of the situation as well as the person's participation experience or related intrapersonal variables. Participation-related outcomes, sense of self, activity competence or preferences, are dependent on experiences, the opportunities for experiences that are provided, and the supports and resources that are available. So what might participation as means look like? It might look like inclusive spaces that are based on universal design principles so that they are free of physical barriers, provide welcoming atmosphere, are child-centred and user-friendly approaches for everyone, where furniture, equipment and materials are suitable for all children, so that any child can exercise choice and experience engagement. A second way to think about participation as means is to consider immersive environments, and these are experiential approaches where opportunities are provided by immersion in real-life supportive activity settings, and these settings provide real opportunity for experiences involving personal growth and choice and social interaction, and that over time these experiences enable the individual to become aware of their strengths, their sense of identity, and open the doors to them to life's opportunities. And your life skills programs here at Holland Bloorview are perfect examples of this. Oh, there they are, sorry, I'm keeping up with my clicking. Another perfect example is Beitostølen Health Sports Centre in Norway. I'm going to give you a quick ad to write down. Beitostølen is an adapted physical activity rehabilitation centre that operates what they call a local environment model. This uses participation to improve participation. The basic structure is that you apply to attend the centre and are accepted along with others from your home region, so that in effect you attend with a local group, although you may never have met the others before. Staff visit you at home to set physical activity goals before you go, and then children or adults have a 3 to 4 week stay with one family member. Several groups will be in the centre at any one time, and they have a shared dining room, recreation rooms and activities that are available along with your own structured program. And after your stay, there's follow-up at home. At Beitostølen, the focus is on attendance and involvement in a context that is safe, provides learning, is social and involves family. The mechanisms for change are opportunities for choice, fun, friendships, availability of specialised health professionals and time. I think we heard those words already today. The outcomes are sense of achievement, building aspirations, friends, independence, enjoyment, skills, improved body function, and ongoing participation in their own communities. So the key ingredients in immersive environments are a supportive program atmosphere with multiple opportunities for social interaction, choice, and personal growth. There are socially mediated teaching and learning opportunities that are non-intrusive, that support, encourage and engage children and youth. There's intentional fostering of experiences of social belonging, choice and control, engagement and meaningful interactions. And the outcomes involve awareness of new opportunities, sense of hope for the future, self-determination, selection of preferred niches, and the creation of new goals. So, now I seem to be in the business of telling you things you already know. But I think it's really important. Each of the examples I've given so far have provided exciting ways for fostering participation that are new to health services' ways of thinking in many places. In each, participation is seen in a transactional framework. Transactional frameworks focus on shifting rehabilitation to real-world contexts, where participation and environment are in focus more than body function and activity. To achieve that requires a broader understanding and a deeper awareness of the lives of children and families and of the transactional processes that change over the life course. It might also require a complete reconceptualisation of how we deliver health and community services. So why should we change? Living with or without a lifelong impairment requires multiple ongoing adjustments and adaptations across the lifespan, as contexts, activities, processes and people change. In the presence of impairment, there can be a focus on socialising children and families to rehabilitation and therapy rather than to their situations and contexts. So, is therapy a life situation? In the family of participation-related constructs, the framework is neutral about the activities or settings in which participation is considered. Life situations of children are commonly discussed as home, preschool and school, community. But what about therapy? If therapy is a life situation in which children and families, along with us, participate, then we need to consider carefully aspects of attendance and involvement. When we think about participation attendance, we're seeking to understand and optimise the frequency, the time spent, or the diversity of activities, and the patterns of attendance across home, school and community, across the life course. But do we know how much is enough? Or what is a desirable pattern? I think we're gathering evidences about that in those situations. And if we think about therapy, we have to ask ourselves exactly the same questions. How much is enough is a very common therapeutic question. But have we started asking it of participation-focused research yet? And what about the desirable pattern of participation attendance in therapy across the life course? What should that look like, and for what outcomes? In therapy, attendance has often been acquainted with client or family response to following regimes, adhering to recommendations or advice, complying with instructions, doing as they're told, doing as expected with the goal of achieving a therapeutic dose. Unfortunately, meeting these requirements is frequently met with the mother's lament of, "I don't want to be my child's therapist." So what about participation involvement in therapy? Involvement in the family of participation-related constructs is defined as the experience while attending. I've already used these words before today. In healthcare literature, the term engagement is used more often than involvement. And engagement's defined as a co-constructed process and state, incorporating a process of gradually connecting with each other so that we can work together for improved healthcare outcomes. In a review of healthcare engagement, engagement in has been defined as a patient state or the internal experience expressed by observable behaviours, being with what you are doing. Participation, contribution, persistence, deliberate, intentional, effortful. Engagement with has a process of connecting between clients and practitioners and services. It's relational, it's collaborative, but it's also been described as appointment keeping and compliance. So, how well are we doing? Bridget O'Connor is a doctoral student just finishing up. Her final study was of parents' experiences of therapy assessments. She's interviewed parents of children with cerebral palsy to talk about the experience of engaging in informal assessments. The study arose following a prior study in which therapists identified that one of the challenges of using formal assessments, evidence-based assessments, in practice related to their level of comfort and confidence in engaging with parents around assessment. The analysis generated the steering wheel for collaborative assessment that illustrates our understanding of these parents' experiences in formal assessment. The steering wheel has a central hub with 4 radiating spokes to an inner rim and an outer rim. The hub contains 2 central themes, protection and framing assessment positively. Most central is protection, where parents act to protect their child's identity, their being, their representation through assessment, and the parent's own psychological well-being during diagnostic and assessment processes. Framing assessment positively wraps around protection, connected by dotted, porous line to indicate the potential influence of assessment on parents' need to protect their child. We propose that the way assessment and diagnosis is framed strongly influences parents' need to protect, with enduring impacts on collaboration and building capacity with parents. The themes illustrated that a parent's need to protect is magnified by negative assessment interactions that threaten their child's identity, revive feelings of grief, and erode optimism, making collaboration with assessment difficult. In these situations, the gap between parent and therapist view of assessment may widen. Parents may avoid assessment interactions altogether or feel they can only participate as a resigned spectator of their child's assessment. Assessment may hold little worth and impact parent motivation to implement assessment recommendations. In contrast, positively framed assessment interactions that focus on the child's strengths reduce the parent's need to protect, opening up opportunities for parents to be involved in the assessment process. When framed positively, parents may reconcile the assessment process more easily and feel able to choose how they want to be involved according to their circumstances and priorities. Parents' capacity can be developed so parents can instigate assessment that's relevant and helps inform the direction and content of their child's therapy. Assessment in this instance is collaborative. It builds capacity as represented by the outermost rim. The steering wheel also provides a metaphor for assessment. The steering wheel implies that the assessment process is driven, with choices made about where to go and the route to be taken. Assessment determines the directions for therapy intervention, a process driven traditionally by the therapist or the rehab team. Within the paradigm of capacity building, we can ask, who's holding the wheel and how tightly? The therapist, the parent and child, or both? Assessment is a learning process for parents and their child that perhaps requires the therapist to loosen their grip on the wheel. Bridget's work was not designed as a participation-focused study, but it clearly brings us back to needing to think very carefully about this idea of participation, attendance, and involvement in therapy as a life situation. Therapy might not be mostly harmless, as Douglas Adams would say. Therapy has hidden reefs and shoals, as well as some obvious rocks, and hopefully lots of preferred destinations. The work coming from this part of the world, in Canada, here, provides us with an important set of principles and practices about how to engage with clients in therapeutic interactions. Using self-determination theory suggests we need to support autonomy, relatedness, and competence. And although I think we have come a long way in delivering family-centred care consistent with these ideas, I think we also struggle with what might feel like competing ideas in both what to value and how to enact our values with respect and compassion as therapists, as service managers, and as policymakers. The notion of engaging in therapy described here as affective, behavioural and cognitive commitment describes a range of positive, energising traits and efforts. These ideas are consistent with the stories of some parents in Bridget's study who felt they were in good hands, that they could work together with their therapist and be involved in assessment to support the things they valued for their child. Those parents' experiences, though, sat in stark contrast to others who felt an eroding sense of optimism and experienced assessment as spectators in a disconnected process that was done by and for the therapist. Engagement should be given very special consideration in therapeutic interventions. It will shape how the child and family and practitioner experience the intervention. If therapy is a life situation, participation, attendance and involvement must be the means to other outcomes rather than continuing to come to therapy. therapy is situated in real life contexts, then engagement will be in other life situations, not therapy. Therapy will be about seeking opportunities and experiences to support participation, attendance and involvement, focused on naturally occurring transactions in supporting in-context experiences and capacity development in the situation they need to be occurring. The practitioner's role will be advocates, knowledge brokers, collaborators, facilitators, educators and coaches, not experts doing too. If therapy is a special life situation, then maximising outcomes in the minimum time period might be an imperative. Right. If involvement is defined as engagement and persistence, affect and perhaps social connection, then current literature suggests that engagement can be supported as both a process and a state, and the state of engagement includes persistence and affect, which can be further described as affective, cognitive and behavioural engagement, and social connection is a critical component of the therapeutic relationship. So you might have noticed I'm talking about involvement and engagement as if perhaps they're the same thing. Are they? In the family of participation-related constructs, involvement's defined as the experience of participating while attending. And as of today, I'm quite satisfied with that definition. The part that's challenging me is the next part that was derived from the conceptual analysis and captures varied elements of the experience. When we finished our prior reviews, we knew we hadn't finished our task of trying to unpack the construct. And although the outcome so far has been helpful, we still need clarity about how to measure these constructs. So we thought a systematic review. A systematic review of measures would probably turn up a couple of beautifully designed, valid, reliable measures that would help us work out when things were going well for children. Measures that capture the two elements, attendance and in particular involvement. And even if we didn't find measures for the situation that we were interested in, we thought we'd find measures of involvement that would help us validate or understand the construct. So off we set. I'm not going to go through the review today fully, but needless to say, it turned into an epic and Burke deserves a medal. After locating 20,394 unique publications, we identified 309 measures, and of these 118 were named measures, 61 were developed specifically and only for the study they were used in, and there were 130 counts of frequency of observed behaviour. I'm just going to focus on the intervention measures, so let me tell you. Originally, we had planned to map every measure we found to the constructs in the framework, but there were too many. So we started with the 118 named measures and focused on those that had been used in research more than once. So at least two sets of authors needed to have used these measures to measure what they thought of as participation to be mapped. So this is what we found. So you can see from this that only 10 of the measures or scales in a measure map to the idea of involvement. And of these 10 measures, 2 measured involvement as a construct, and they were the participation and environment measures. 6 measured enjoyment, and 3 measured what I called varied constructs. The involvement construct, when not enjoyment, provided these ideas. The PEMS, how involved? Your child is actively engaged most of the time. He or she interacts or is helpful for most of the activity. So here the idea of engagement is being used to operationalise involvement. In the play assessment, the items are defined as representing the latent trait of playability, defined as meaningful doing, mindful doing, and expressing mastery, and measured as frequency of occurrence in natural play settings. So there's some really interesting words here, and then we count how often it happens. In the Knox play scale, the amount and manner of interaction with persons in the environment and the degree of independence and cooperation is the definition. So here is what I would call social connection and activity competence, doing it all by yourself, doing it as expected, all mixed in together. So those were the named measures. What about the measures that we excluded from this first systematic review? I've started to look at the counts of frequency of behaviour. And because there are 130 papers, I started with those for young children, and there are 43 papers there. And of these, 13 included ratings of engagement explicitly. And here are some of the definitions of engagement that come out of those papers. And I've highlighted the words that seem to me to speak to the idea of engagement as involvement. Actively involved, acknowledging others, orientation towards, action with, proximity to, interactions in. So there's some really interesting words. What about the 61 study-specific measures? Do they measure involvement well? Who knows? I haven't had time to look yet. So where am I going with this? The first requirement for measurement is that you define the construct, which we have, and looking more closely, we've defined involvement as the experience of participation, including elements of engagement, described in various measures, orientation to and action with, persistence, described as time spent and sustained effort, perhaps social connection, not sure if it's the same as counting social interactions, and affect, which I hope is more than enjoyment. So I always think when I'm not sure, it's good to ask the kids what they think. So we have. So Kate Simpson is leading some work to see if we can elicit the idea of involvement from children with ASD, aged 10 to 12. The children collect their own self-narrated videos, and then Kate does a video elicited interview with them. And this is what we're hearing so far. We're not done yet. Depending on the child and the activity in question, we hear a combination of ideas about their experience when participating. They might be very involved and enjoying the activity. I have to focus to win. It's my alone time. It takes my mind off other things. It takes me to another world. It soothes me. I really enjoy it when I'm reading. What about very involved and not enjoying? I focus so I don't have to do it again. And somewhat involved and somewhat enjoying. I mostly enjoy it, but I get sidetracked and I can think about other things. And somewhat involved and not enjoying it, I'm 50% involved. I can think about other things and I don't like doing it. So it seems to me that these children are talking about thinking, doing and feeling. Seem familiar? Measuring involvement. There's lots of issues. Is it observable? Is it observable at the level of the brain, in individual behaviour, between people, between ecological systems? Who should rate it? How else should it be measured? Are involvement and engagement interchangeable constructs? It's a multidimensional construct, so how should that be measured? We need more carefully designed measures. So why does it matter? In child development research and practice, we've traditionally been focused on providing interventions with the aim of seeing children develop increasingly complex behaviours. Increasingly complex behaviours have typically been seen as synonymous with developing activity competence, and this has typically been seen as following a normative process. But if we focus on the development of skill or activity competence out of context, then we risk missing the idea that learning for life is done by living your life. And if we focus on children meeting developmental norms, then we risk losing sight of diversity, and we disenfranchise those whose bodies work differently or whose level of interdependence is greater than others. And if we focus on skill development out of context, then we find ourselves focusing on the blobs in the family of participator-related constructs instead of the arrows. The family of participation-related constructs aims to bring into focus the transactions at play in varying activity settings or life situations. So how can we study transactions to understand involvement? Well, there are many ways, but I have one example for you today. This work is led by Robin Heish, and we aim to understand what happens in the daily life of children with cerebral palsy, classified at GMFCS 4 or 5, so needing a wheelchair, and their carers, and how they work together to achieve the practical aspects of their daily routines. Because of their motor impairments, these children will always need some assistance to complete the daily routines of getting dressed, managing toileting and bathing. And we invited parent-child dyads to choose one difficult to complete but important daily routine, and we videoed completion in their home and undertook a video-elicited interview. Our qualitative thematic analysis to understand how daily routines get done on a daily basis was what we then did. The thematic synthesis was inspired by a comment from a carer and uses the language of the participants. And the participants in this study were highly competent and routines were successfully achieved. and we found that they were achieved in three main ways. Some days are like a racing car, the straightest line possible to get the job done. This was described as a good day. The child could contribute some useful skills, and the child and carer worked well together. The child's body felt organised or calm. This was often how a school morning worked. There was no time for learning new skills. It was quicker and easier for the carer to do most of the tasks for the child. Some days were tractor days. Disruptors occurred along the road, so doing things quickly and easily wasn't possible. Equipment didn't work. The child and carer were tired, or the child had a disorganised, stiff body that was hard to work with. These were times where routines were slow and hard work. Some days were times identified when there was opportunity to upskill. The family could travel in an SUV that was still strong and fast, but they could take more time and bring others along. Facilitators that helped on this road to learning and change were the expectation that the child could contribute, recognising the child's intention to be helpful, knowledge about the child's body work, how the child's body works, and using trial and error. This road required time and patience from the carer. This very thoughtful work of Robin's provides a window into the varied daily life transactions, that is, involvement in the moment, day after day, that over time leads to both skill development and future participation. I've only given you the tip of this iceberg, but I am sure you can see that focusing on the transactions that occur in real contexts on a daily basis provides an opportunity to explore together with children and families the where and what and how of their life's ambitions. Development is what happens while you're busy experiencing life, both positively and negatively. If participation as means is a transactional phenomenon, then how do we enhance and measure transactional exchanges over time? To assess transactions, we need to understand what is provided, what is experienced by everyone in the situation. Life, including therapy, is a series of situations, and situational characteristics influence what people feel, think, and do in the moment and over time. Children's experiences and behaviours are influenced by how they interact with others and the structures of the situation. The arrows and verbs and the family of participation-related constructs convey potential transactions among the related constructs. The verbs emanate from the person and the environment and provide a starting point to consider transactions that encompass the person and the situation and environment together, and how these can be thought about and measured. In the family of participation-related constructs, the blobs are not as important as the arrows. Understanding the transactions among the domains and supporting processes is important. This is where important knowledge resides about how and what changes over time, as well as the entry points for intervention. Slow on my clicking again. There it is. So, I'm nearly done. When talking about crafting a preferred future, we often look to the horizon. Horizons for children and families include some things that are clearly in view, such as starting school. But the very nature of a horizon means that there's also things over the horizon that are unseen. Perhaps we can imagine what they might be. A range of different activities, friendships, leisure opportunities, and work maybe. If we're going to work with people with the future in mind, do we need to learn together what sort of sailors they are? Do they navigate with certainty, using a chart and a compass on a pre-planned course, taking care to avoid rocks and shoals as best they can? Do they prefer to drift with the breeze and tides, taking opportunities that arise, stopping at islands as they appear, not troubled by what's over the horizon, living and being in the moment? Do they chart carefully some aspects of their lives and drift in others, hopping from dinghy to yacht to motorboat, depending on whether their eye is on family, school, or work and relationships? Are choices of mode of travel available, or are they prescribed by others? Who's got the chart? Who's holding the wheel? Whatever the mode of travel, it seems to me that the future is what suddenly appears on your doorstep while you're busy living your life. So how children and youth with disabilities and their families are enabled to live is important. Focusing on participation, attendance and involvement allows us to accept cultural and individual expectations related to activity choice and preferences and ideas of competence, and focus on other aspects that are important to facilitating participation. But global perspectives on participation provide vignettes that challenge, as suggested by these titles, of some of the stories of participation and childhood disability that Dido Green and I have been collecting from around the world. And very recently, I learned that even in so-called progressive societies, the life expectancy of an individual with an intellectual impairment is only 53 years. And those who die unexpectedly, that is, not of a known cause or illness, have less than a 1% chance of the reason for their death being investigated. They've gone to a better place is not an uncommon platitude, I think, that leaves us wondering, or me wondering, about the value that is placed on some lives. Participation is happening in every minute of every day. It is always a means and an ends. Perhaps the family of participation-related constructs can assist us to focus first on participation, with enabling living as front and centre in our thoughts as we design research in collaboration with consumers and families that investigates the transactions over time and across contexts, that tells us how to open doors and create ever-expanding opportunities for those with childhood onset disability. I had 3 main messages today, but my main message is about living a good life. A good life is meaningful and healthy. A good life is individually and collectively constructed. A good life is not dependent on being fixed and normal. A good life is participatory. And participation is attendance and involvement. Thank you for yours.
So thank you, Professor Eames, for challenging our thinking about rehab interventions and thinking about ultimately the transactions to promote participation regardless of life situations and competence. And thank you for reminding us about how participation is so much anchored on what matters to the child and family, the preferences, strengths, friendships, sense of self in their personal real-world context. I think you've left us with much thought for the rest of the day, so thank you very much. I'm now pleased to introduce the first research talk of the day entitled Early Intervention in the Clinic. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Jessica Bryan, psychologist and clinician investigator in the Autism Research Center here at Holland Bloorview.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to follow up a little bit on more information about intervention and in the context of the family. So today I'm really going to be focusing on a group-based intervention program that I've been working on with that's designed for toddlers who have sort of social communication challenges or early signs of autism spectrum disorder. As many of you know, autism spectrum disorder, also often referred to as ASD, is a developmental condition that's characterized by difficulties in social communication. So that really refers to a child's ability to interact with and communicate with a social partner. And by difficulties in behavior that are largely characterized by sort of repetitive or restricted or limited ways of interacting with the environment. In many cases, my little thing is not responding. In many cases, autism spectrum disorder can be detected very early in development. So in the first year or two of life, very often the first signs of autism spectrum disorder may emerge in children. So one advantage of sort of watching for early signs and detecting ASD as early as possible is that children can benefit from early intervention if we detect these signs early in development. Very early in development, we know that children, their brains are plastic or malleable, which means they're very open to learning. And so there's lots of opportunity if we get in early with intervention to sort of have big outcomes in terms of long-term outcomes for these children. So this is sort of really based on the idea of neuroplasticity. So the brain is really at an optimal state of learning very, very early in development. One of the challenges that we're faced with in Canada and in many other countries is that there are very long waiting times to receive intervention. So this is sort of, we talk sometimes about multiple waiting times. So families are often waiting to receive a diagnosis and then waiting, certainly in many areas in Canada, many months or even years before their child can access intervention. So this essentially nullifies the opportunity for children to get very early intervention that's focused on ASD symptoms. So one solution to this is to help parents who are spending the bulk of their time with their little ones in that first year or two of life, to help them by sort of teaching them extra tools or strategies or techniques that they can use to sort of foster or support their children's development at this really critical time in learning. So we call these interventions parent-mediated interventions, and really what that means is that parents are using strategies to help their child learn things. That's pretty straightforward. So parent-mediated interventions are provide a really nice opportunity for children to access intervention very, very early in development in their natural environment where they're spending most of their time with their primary caregivers. One of the reasons that we really like the idea of parent-mediated interventions, particularly in the toddler period, is that the bulk of learning in this first year or two of life is parent-mediated anyway. So this is sort of what we're capitalizing on is the idea that parents and children spend most of their time together very early in life. Parents already have many, many strategies that they use to foster their children's development, and our goal is really to support those parents to tweak those strategies to optimize development when children are having some difficulties. So let me just set some scenes for you. So you have a little one who's crying. You go and you comfort them. Your baby maybe points to a dog. You look at your baby, you smile, you say doggy. Your toddler might take a step towards you. You get down low, you put your arms out to receive your baby as they approach you. Maybe your preschooler tells you they want to help you make chocolate chip cookies. You're going to show them how to hold the spoon, how to stir, maybe how to measure the ingredients. So all of these are examples of what we could call parent-mediated interventions that are taking place early in development. All of these are examples of child-led activities, so they were all things that your child took the initiative of, showed you they were ready to learn or wanted to learn, and you joined in to help them. They're all examples of activities that can take place in the natural caregiving environment, in the family home. And the list that I provided could be considered developmentally sensitive. So we're sort of meeting the child where they're at in terms of their development. So many of the models that are being developed and evaluated for intervention for toddlers with early signs of ASD have these sort of four components as core to their programs. So as I noted, parents are using these parent-mediated strategies very often in their child's life in very natural ways. But sometimes parents need a little bit of help when they have a child who may have different ways of communicating or may provide cues that are difficult to understand, may have motivations or interests that are hard for the parent to recognize or to follow. or for children who get stuck playing in a particular way over and over again and aren't sort of experiencing the wider world. So in these situations, this is where parent coaching can come in models. So one such parent coaching model is a model that we call the social ABCs. I co-developed this intervention with a colleague in Halifax, Susan Bryson. And our social ABCs is a parent-mediated intervention. It's a 12-week period of time where parents are coached to use strategies in their home that will enhance their child's social communication and play skills and connectedness. We use child-led principles, and we work on activities that can be integrated into the family's everyday experience. And we work with children who are between 12 and 36 months of age. In the social ABCs, we work on two primary targets that we believe will have really big impacts on the children. So the first target is sharing positive emotions or sort of sharing enjoyment with your caregiver, looking at them, being engaged with them. We have to work on how we characterize engagement, but really sort of thinking about how to connect emotionally in a positive way with caregivers. And the second target is functional communication directed between child and caregiver. So to find out first whether the social ABCs as we designed it works, we conducted a randomized controlled trial with about 60 families. Half the families received social ABCs coaching right away. Half the families waited 6 months, and we compared families after that first 6-month period. And what we found is that parents learned the techniques, they smiled more following the intervention, and they told us that they felt empowered and hopeful, and they felt effective in terms of interacting with their children. The toddlers, after this period of coaching, had gains in terms of their communication, as well as how much time they spent looking at their caregivers and communicating with them. So we felt very excited that the social ABCs works, but we were sort of struggling with the idea that we have amazing resources, but they're limited, and we wanted to reach more families more quickly while the learning was optimal. So we've developed a group-based model, which is abbreviated from 12 weeks down to 6 weeks. And so far, we've been working with families from Holland Bloorview who are somewhere in the system of receiving a diagnostic assessment. So they may be on a waiting list, they may have seen a diagnosing clinician who may or may not have been able to determine a diagnosis yet. So they're sort of somewhere in, or they may have received a diagnosis of ASD. So far, we've worked with, we've run 4 groups. We just finished our 4th group. We started this past May. We've worked with 12 families so far that incorporated 13 toddlers, 3 dads and 10 mothers, and we've been training 6 staff and trainees so far. So far what we're finding is that our group-based model, which is abbreviated and sort of allows us to work with small groups of families all at the same time, at least for part of the training, we're finding that the parents are learning the strategies pretty similarly to how they learned the strategies in our longer model, and we're seeing gains. The children are showing us the same kinds of gains in what we call here responsiveness, which is really kind of the rate at which a child responds to their parents when they try to communicate with them. We've been hearing really positive feedback from the families. So this is one family who sort of talked about feeling like their child is now initiating this social conversation, more aware of people around him. Mom saying she's using the techniques at home, which is really the point, which is amazing. And then she just reported that her son, for the first time, used his 2 words together. And she really described this as a life-changing experience. We're also hearing really positive feedback from the staff. So one of the goals of this model was to integrate it into our clinical care model, and so we've trained one of our clinical speech-language pathologists who is really excited about the program as well. So there's some things we really need to investigate further, and one of the things that we constantly sort of challenge ourselves about is how do we reconcile the idea of sort of knowing that many of these parents are very stretched in terms of the resources they're already committing to their families, and how do we sort of reconcile the idea of adding more things to learn, more visits to attend, without families feeling like we've sort of tipped the balance in terms of increasing their burden. And so far what we're really hearing from families is that the way that our model supports them allows that balance to remain in balance and not to tip over. So we do want to learn more about families who don't participate in this type of intervention, what they see as the barriers and how we might support that. And we sort of have a little component about taking care of yourself, which everybody knows is important. We don't feel that it's enough. And so our coaching model sort of is embedded in our coaching model is the idea of sort of really engaging parents as active partners in the process and helping parents really feel empowered. And so far what we're hearing from families is that sort of mitigating any added burden in terms of asking them to make more visits and learn more things. So to pull it together, we're finding that our small group-based parent coaching model seems to be working. We're finding that parents are describing feeling empowered and hopeful. The children are making nice gains in a relatively short period of time. We can think about this as a low resource option that can be sort of put in place very quickly when very early signs of autism spectrum disorder may be presenting themselves or related social communication challenges. We're very excited about the idea of intervening before families have to wait for that formalized diagnosis to happen, because we know that as we see kids younger and younger in development, it's sometimes harder to make a definitive diagnosis. So if we can see kids at 12 or 15 months, we may be in a position where it's hard to say for sure if this child has autism or not, but we know that they're showing these early social communication challenges, and we can get in early with these interventions to support their development at a time where learning is really optimal. We're also feeling very hopeful in terms of hearing back from families about using the strategies at home in the midst of the intervention, but also when their role in our studies, let's say, ends, because the idea then is that we've provided families with strategies that they may be able to use as their children continue to develop, so we can sort of have ways to support them going forward. So our hope is that this type of model could become part of sort of the clinical care pathway at places like Holland Bloorview, but also potentially across Canada and globally. We're going to aim big. So I do just want to take a moment to acknowledge everyone, the village, who has made this happen. So obviously this work would not be possible without our generous funders. So I would like to thank the Alva Foundation and CIBC, as well as Kids Brain Health Network. And I really do want to acknowledge the tremendous commitment that the families and their toddlers have made to be part of our work. I want to acknowledge the staff and trainees, the Child Development Program, Martha, who's allowed this to happen in the context of our clinical work, our coaches who are amazing, and collaborators. And thank you all for your attention today.
Thank you very much, and I really appreciate the effort to support the child by thinking about the family and thinking about the family's experience. It's very, very important. Thank you.
Oh, that's lovely. Yeah. Thank you very much. That's lovely. It's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's beautiful.
So thank you again to our first two presenters. And I hope that everybody has enjoyed our first research talks. At this time, we're going to take a 15-minute break before returning for our first round of quick hits and the final research talk for the morning. So refreshments will be served just outside the conference area here, and if you can, make sure to stop by the mini art exhibit Telling My Tale. It's absolutely wonderful, so you're not going to want to miss that. And it's right across the hall in room 1E195. Thank you.
So welcome back, everyone. It's now time for the Quick Hits feature of our symposium, the first Quick Hits segment. The Quick Hits will feature research talks in a fast and furious manner. That's what it says in my notes. Each presenter will also have a poster on display from 1 to 2 p.m. in the atrium, so you can learn more and ask questions at that time. I will now turn it over to our presenters.
Okay, thank you. So today I'll provide a brief overview of our group's work exploring the effect of multi-session transcranial direct current stimulation, or TDCS, on cognitive performance in youth with concussion. Pediatric concussion is a rising public health concern. We know that approximately 30% of youth experience persisting symptoms, which include cognitive challenges with working memory and dual tasking. TDCS is an intervention factor that has the potential to facilitate recovery after brain injury in children and adults when used in conjunction with behavioral rehabilitation paradigms. However, its rehabilitative potential has yet to be explored in a youth concussion population. The aim of our study was to explore the potential clinical efficacy, tolerability, and feasibility of implementing a 3-session TDCS intervention with youth with persisting cognitive concussion symptoms. We wanted to know if 3 sessions of real versus sham TDCS over the left dorsolateral prefrontal cortex during a working memory task impacted performance. Further, we were interested in learning about how participants ranked the subjective experience of receiving TDCS. We found that all participants improved their accuracy on the working memory task across study days, suggesting that youth with persisting cognitive symptoms had the ability to improve on novel cognitive skills with practice. We found preliminary trends for TDCS enhancing improvements in task accuracy. While all participants significantly decreased their reaction times across study days, these performance changes did not appear to be impacted by TDCS. We found that TDCS had acceptable tolerability in this population, with symptom ratings comparable to other pediatric groups, and the most negative ratings being driven by the sham TDCS group, so those not receiving TDCS. We found that recruitment rates were low, which introduced a challenge to feasibility. This study provided preliminary evidence that TDCS has a potential as a safe and tolerable intervention for persisting cognitive symptoms post-pediatric concussion that merits exploration in a larger clinical trial. Thank you for your attention. To know more, please visit poster number 4 or contact Derek Beal. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Laura. I'm a previous Ward Summer student. And I'm Ardith Barfelt. I'm a psychologist at the Get Up and Go Persistent Pediatric Pain Rehabilitation Service. And the Get Up and Go program is a unique program in Canada. It's an inpatient program for kids and families affected by persistent pain. As part of our program, there we go. As part of our program, patients and families both receive a binder of resources, and it's a very thick binder. And through this binder, people get to support the learning that they're getting in their programs, individual and group, and they also take it home with them. So it's an opportunity to bring home some of the learning and apply it to their home and community settings. Now, what we wanted to do through this project was to improve the fit between what the objectives of the clinicians were and the needs of the patients and families. So our question for this quality improvement project was, what are the experiences of those who receive the Get Up and Go resources? Are they meeting the needs of the end users? How may they be improved? Our hope was that this would support improved experience and make it more relevant to the people who are using it.
So after conducting a literature review that identified that there weren't any guidelines for resources within clinical practice for chronic pain, we conducted a multifaceted needs assessment, interviewing staff, clients, and families to ask them what their opinions were about what kinds of resources they would be looking for. We then combined their feedback into a thematic analysis and let that inform the modification of our existing and the development of new resources, which we then implemented program-wide. Our preliminary findings were as follows. The staff identified that there were always areas to improve in clinical practice, and the Patients surprisingly identified that their clinical interaction with our clinical teams were more important than the physical resources that they received, and the parents identified that the sentiment of the more is always better. If you have any more questions about our project, please feel free to visit our poster. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Amy Illingworth, and I feel very privileged to be the family leader on this project. As a mom of a daughter with cerebral palsy, it's very close to my heart. This is a novel, personalizable access technology for children with cerebral palsy or complex communication needs. This is a 4-year project funded by the Cerebral Palsy Alliance Research Foundation in collaboration with the Cerebral Palsy Alliance Research Institute. Access technologies enable the use of various inputs to independently control the computer or communication aid. However, approximately 30% of access technologies are abandoned within the first few months of use, largely due to changing needs of the user or dissatisfaction with performance. Conventional access technologies tend to rely on physical movements like pushing a button. This can be difficult for children with cerebral palsy who lack muscle control or experience involuntary movements. Speech recognition tools like Siri and Alexa and Google Home could be very empowering for children with CP who are verbal. However, there's issues with those tools for people with slurred or slowed speech, especially for children. We need a technology that can be personalized to leverage children's strengths and evolve with them as they change. Our novel technology, Switch app, will be able to detect facial and head movements. You can see the boy there. He's making facial movements and head movements and vocalization or keywords using webcam and a microphone. Switch app is highly customizable by the families to the child's evolving capabilities, which makes it easier to use and more flexible for a wide variety of children and their capabilities. Starting with video games, Switch app will motivate children to use the technology, learn that they can control other areas of their environment, and to be more independent. I love sneaky things. All right, preliminary results. As I mentioned, this is a 4-year project. We are currently in the first year of the technology development phase. So far, we have preliminary results related to speech and lip reading algorithms. The algorithm for keyword recognition using audio signal tested online live for 2 children with CP and speech impairment reached a top accuracy of 89 to 99%. And the lip reading algorithm tested offline using audio and video signals reached a top accuracy of 91 to 99%. So great results so far. And contact us if you want to learn more about Switch app. Thank you.
There's been increased interest surrounding arts-based research in health broadly and here at Holland Bloorview. As a critical qualitative arts-based researcher, I share in this energy. I welcome this energy, but I do so with caution. I'm Katie Ma, a PhD candidate immersed in a dissertation that explores how children understand concussion and how these understandings are taken up by adults. Along my research journey, I've stumbled and made mistakes. I've used my method before fully understanding its complexities and have misrepresented my participants. But I've also learned and grown. And it's through this stumbling and growing that I've gained insight into the reflexive use of arts-based methods. Reflexivity in research implies a sense of responsibility, of thoughtfulness. For my work, this means being thoughtful about how and why I use my method beyond claims of innovation and so-called child-friendliness. Arts-based research has the ability to evoke emotion, to provoke, inspire, and capture audiences. I've seen this when drawings of concussion have brought audiences to tears because of their violent nature or the sense of fear portrayed. But with this unique ability comes a responsibility, not to misuse or abuse the evocative nature of arts-based work, not to put that message of fear or violence out into the world without saying anything more about it. Our job as researchers is to say more. Data do not speak for themselves, drawings are not evidence of voice, and the products of arts-based work are not art, but data to be analyzed and interpreted. Now, some may be thinking that to analyze these products is to move away from participants' true stories. I say that to analyze this data is to value what participants have shared in the name of research. It is our job to make more of each participant's individual account. by interpreting it within the larger data set, framing it within the substantive literature and broader literature. This is how we thoughtfully represent our participants' stories, by taking them seriously as data, by holding them back from public display until analysis is complete, the story is told and ready to be shared. This is how we remain responsible and move toward being thoughtful. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Jennifer Ryan, and our team looked at documenting the motor learning content of physiotherapy in children with cerebral palsy. So every day, children with cerebral palsy come to Holland Bloorview for physiotherapy with the goal of learning a new motor skill to improve upon their daily function. And now more than ever, new treatment approaches are being studied in CP in hopes of improving motor learning. But if these new approaches are better than traditional learning, how are they better and how do they promote motor learning? While one study might emphasize the importance of repetition in motor learning, another might look at error-based learning, and while yet another might look at the different types of feedback. Without understanding the motor learning content of these treatments, it's difficult to understand and determine the effective aspects of the treatment. Our team believes the answer lies in motor learning strategies, which are the specific actions a therapist takes to promote motor learning by selecting and manipulating motor learning variables based on child and task-specific factors. The Motor Learning Strategies Rating Instrument, or MLSRI, is an assessment that was developed here at Holland Bloorview and in part with CanChild in pediatric acquired brain injury. And it measures the extent that different motor learning strategies are observed during video recorded treatment sessions and creates a profile of motor learning strategies use. Our team evaluated its reliability within ongoing clinical trials for the Locomat at Holland Bloorview for children with CP. Our raters scored a total of 30 videos of treatment sessions within the study that were either traditional or Locomat-based physiotherapy interventions. And we found that the MLSRI can reliably be used in physiotherapy interventions for children with CP. And future considerations for the measure would involve expanding it for use in other professions who provide motor skills-based interventions and using it in other neuromotor diagnoses. Thank you.
Overweight and obesity is a public health concern.
It's an epidemic, it's a crisis. These are the things that weight-related literature, media, and policy are saying about childhood obesity in Canada. Yes, obesity can put a child at risk for the development of physical health conditions. However, weight-related stigma also puts children at risk for low self-esteem, social isolation, and further weight gain. Healthcare providers are key players in ensuring the health and well-being of children, especially those who interact regularly with them, such as children with ASD, who've been shown to be at higher risk of developing overweight and obesity. The very ways in which healthcare providers bring up the topic of weight and the words they use when discussing weight with children have the potential to reinforce stigma and contribute to negative outcomes. It's important that they have these conversations. However, the words they choose need to be crafted carefully to ensure they're helping children and not perpetuating stigma. In order for them to have these important conversations with this population, we need to know what the kids themselves think. According to the UN Conventions on the Rights of a Child, children are legally entitled to play an active role in matters pertaining to their care. But if we're not asking them what matters to them, we're denying them this right. So, to explore the perspectives of youth with ASD with regards to weight and their bodies, we conducted qualitative interviews. Our participants challenged the dominant discourse that higher weight is associated with poor body image and an unwillingness to be active. To promote these positive relationships, we propose a call to action to shift the normative thinking and fixation on weight and size to focus on growth and health. As healthcare providers, if we can make this shift, we can simultaneously transfer our focus from size alone to a focus on physical, social, and psychological well-being. So, while higher weight can sometimes be a concern, calling it an epidemic or a crisis only reinforces stigma, stereotypes, and biases, and does not reflect how some children perceive themselves, their lives, or their bodies. Thank you.
so my name is Kylie and I'm a PhD student in the Concussion Center, and today I'll be presenting on online concussion resources for Canadian high school aged youth, a systematic search strategy. So imagine you're a high school student who's recently been diagnosed with a concussion. After receiving this diagnosis, you turn to the internet to find out more information. But after reading a few of these resources available online, you realize you have more questions than you did answers. Thinking about our high school student, what do they find? They find that the majority of these resources are written for parents, teachers, and other adults, even though they're the ones who want to find out the information. They also find that the resources are hard to understand and use, meaning that they use words they don't know or they're too long and complicated. They also find that information varies from resource to resource, so after reading a few, they're no longer sure which information is correct. And lastly, despite the websites saying that they contain concussion information, the resources available there are actually meant for other populations. So what did we do? We completed a 5-phase systematic search strategy by starting at looking at key categories of stakeholder websites in the area of pediatric concussion. We then consulted with experts in the area of pediatric concussion on resources they're aware of or commonly used in their practice. We then applied inclusion and exclusion criteria, followed by reviewing the resources for accuracy according to the current consensus statement on concussion in sport. Lastly, we evaluated the material based on readability, usability, and suitability factors appropriate for high school aged youth. So we identified a total of 456 concussion resources available online, with only 32 meeting our finalized criteria. So this is only 7% of the resources we identified. So when we think about our high school student, this is a lot of information and noise for them to have to go through to find the correct information. If you'd like to learn more, please contact me.
Thank you so much to our first group of Quick Hits presenters. It was amazing. And to learn more about everybody's research, please be sure to visit them during the poster session later this afternoon. So I'd now like to introduce the second and final research talk of the morning. Please join me in welcoming Yash Patel to present his talk titled Maturation of the Human Cerebral Cortex During Adolescence, Myelin or dendritic?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Arbor. Yash is a PhD student in Thomas Powell's Population Neuroscience and Developmental Neuroimaging Program at Holland Bloorview. Welcome, Yash.
Thank you for the introduction. Is this working? Yeah. I can't hear. So today I'll be talking about the maturation of the human cerebral cortex during adolescence, myelin or dendritic arbor. Once again, I'm a PhD student working under the supervision of Dr. Tomas Paz in the newly developed lab, Department of Population Neuroscience and Developmental Neuroimaging. The primary focus of my research is using a novel methodology known as virtual histology. Sounds a bit, yeah. More than 300,000 children and youth in Ontario are living with autism, ADHD, and other forms of neurodevelopmental disorders. It's always important as a researcher to take a step back and acknowledge the sheer magnitude of individuals who are affected by neurodevelopmental disorders. Moreover, the prevalence of autism spectrum disorder has been steadily increasing, as the CDC for the United States has reported a 1 in 59 prevalence, compared that to in 2000, which is 1 in 250. However, as you all know, there's a great demand for research within the fundamental neurobiology that characterizes these neurodevelopmental disorders and what is actually going on within the brain. There's an issue in neuroscience, though. It's difficult to study the human brain. So how do we study the human brain? We have two primary methods, magnetic resonance imaging and histology from postmortem tissue. So magnetic resonance imaging is you have a participant lie down in an MRI scan. It's a loud machine for 10 to 30 minutes, and you get something like this. There's quite a bit of lag. This basically can characterize the macroscopic view of the brain. We can characterize things such as the volume of the brain, the shape, the size, the structure, the cortical thickness, for example. However, this is not enough to actually understand what's going on within the brain. Histology from postmortem tissue, as it suggests, it's that it's postmortem, so you need a participant who has passed away and have donated their tissue for research. This gives us a very detailed view of the cellular structure and the microstructure within the brain. We can identify different types of neurons, different populations of neurons, and the microstructure circuitry that is occurring within different regions of the cortex. So we have an issue. We definitely cannot acquire that many postmortem tissue samples, specifically in neurodevelopmental disorders. It's just difficult, it's almost impossible to get enough data. However, with the magnetic resonance imaging, we have tens and thousands of MRIs available for us to use. We would like to bridge the gap between magnetic resonance imaging and histology from postmortem tissue. So all we want to do is, can we use the MRIs we have already collected and will be collecting for the end of time to figure out more about the histology, the cellular architecture within the cortex? And we have addressed this by using a virtual histology protocol. So before I get into the details, I would first like to introduce the specific part of the brain we'll be working with, the human cerebral cortex. So the cerebral cortex is, if you were to slice the brain in this section, you would see the human cerebral cortex is a thin outer layer of gray matter surrounding the inner core of white matter. Here, it's a cortical ribbon surrounding the brain, and roughly it's 2 to 4 millimeters in cortical thickness. There are 21 billion neurons packed within the cerebral cortex and roughly 300,000 kilometers of wiring. Definitely, this is a very complex and heterogeneous structure within the brain. However, if we were to compare this with a computer, the cerebral cortex is the part of the brain that does all the computations. It's the CPU of the computer. The white matter underneath it is just wires connecting different parts of the CPU. The white matter is termed white because of a substance known as myelin wrapping around the neurons. I'll be getting back to what myelin is and what it does in subsequent slides. So I'll be using data from the imaging cohort, which consists of roughly 2,000 adolescents, and it's a multi-center, longitudinal European neuroimaging initiative. So specifically, I'll be using data from the Imaging Nottingham cohort, which had around 300 individuals at visit 1, at mean age of 14 and a half years old, and at visit 2, there were roughly 200 individuals who were then followed up. Specifically, we'll be using an MRI sequence known as magnetization transfer ratio. I'll be referring to this as MTR. It basically is an indicator of macromolecular density. Macromolecules referring to big molecules. So in this case, it would be like membranes and other types of cellular components. The brighter the image, the more macromolecules there is. The duller the image, the less macromolecules there is. So whenever I say MTR, just think of stuff in a given unit of space. So before I get into the actual histology, we first need to know the background of what we already know within the cortex. So cortical thickness, so the ribbon I mentioned, its thickness decreases during adolescence. So from 14 to 19, we can see a clear decrease within the thickness of the cortex. This is neurotypical. It happens for everyone. It's completely as we have expected it to be. However, in histology from postmortem tissue, luckily this is one of the cases where we have studied adolescents extensively, so we know what is occurring from histology. In this case, we have sections of the cerebral cortex from 0 to 28 years of age, and it's been stained with myelin markers. So the darker it is, the more myelin there is. As you can see, just qualitatively, we can determine that it's getting darker and darker, suggesting there's more myelin within the cortex. This is known as intracortical myelination. So what is this myelin I'm referring to? It's basically a fatty wrapping around the axon of the neuron. Basically, it allows for electrical signals from neurons to pass quicker from point A to point B. So with the data from Imogen, we first analyzed the MRI data, and what we did was we created an aggregate profile of MTR. Once again, MTR is macromolecular density, so how much stuff in the cortex. At visit 1, so at roughly 14 years of age, we see this interregional profile of MTR across the 34 regions in the cortex. We do the same for visit 2. We do the same for visit 2. And you can see the pattern here. And we can then calculate the change in MTR. So it's just a simple subtraction, visit 2 minus visit 1. And here is a change in MTR. This shows that it's positive, suggesting that there is more stuff now in the cortex than there was before. However, this is not enough. That just tells us there's more stuff. What does this actually mean? What is occurring within the brain? And this is where virtual histology will come into play. But before I get to that, it's also important to note that some regions got darker more than other regions. This interregional variation is what we'll use and leverage for the virtual histology protocol. So virtual histology, it's termed virtual because we don't have postmortem tissue. We're actually inferring from what we already have, magnetic resonance imaging. So we start off with gene expression data from the Allen Human Brain Atlas, which has been extensively profiled across the cerebral cortex. Secondly, we use cell-specific gene markers, and collaborators have identified 9 cell types within the cortex. So for each of these 9 cell types, there is a certain amount of genes that are specific to it. So if I see gene X, I will know for sure it's determining that there's a cell type known as, for example, an interneuron in that region. So this kind of gives us almost like a footprint or a pattern of expression specific to each cell type. So what we can then ask is the pattern of expression for one cell type similar to the pattern we see in the brain? The specifics of this I can get to my poster presentation, poster number 29. Don't want to get into the details. However, what we did is this is the change in MTR profile. Now we ask the question, from these 9 cell types we see here, which pattern is most similar to one another? And we see specifically that the oligodendrocyte pattern, this distribution is slightly skewed towards the positive side, suggesting that where regions there are more oligodendrocytes, you'll have more of this change in MTR. So oligodendrocytes are related to MTR. That's great. What do oligodendrocytes do? Myelination. They have a very unique function. It's about myelination. Therefore, what we expected to see is what we ended up seeing. Just by using MRI data sets, we showed that there is myelination occurring in the brain, and we have already known that myelination does occur during the brain during adolescence. So this is a very novel way of introducing more information than what we already have. Basically, we're using MRI scans that we already have acquired and trying to get more out of them about the cellular microstructure and what is occurring within the cortex at a microscopic level. So once again, the change in MTR was related to a pattern of expression with the oligodendrocytes. Oligodendrocytes are related to myelination, and surprise, surprise, we see myelination within the cortex from actual postmortem tissue. We wanted to take this one step further. So what we did was we compared now just the MTR across the cortex. So at visit 1 and visit 2, what is MTR detecting? I mentioned it's detecting macromolecular density, but what is that? What specifically, which macromolecules is it detecting? So we did the same thing. We asked a question statistically, which of these 9 cell types are correlated or have this most similar pattern of expression as the pattern we see here with MTR in this case? We see that CA1 pyramidal cells are significantly correlated with it. And here you could see the skew nicely. It's positively skewed, suggesting that regions where there's more of this specific cell type known as pyramidal cells, you have more MTR. So MTR is related to CA1 pyramidal cells. What's unique about pyramidal cells? Well, they have a cell body that's a pyramid, as the name suggests, pyramidal. However, they also have a dendritic arbor. As you can see, it's a tree-like branching that occurs within these neurons. It just allows neurons to make more patterns and more connections within a given space. So as you would expect, if you have more of these neurons, you'll have more of the dendritic branching or dendritic arbor, as you mentioned. So you have more of these macromolecules in that given space. So more dendritic arbor, more macromolecules, and hence you have more MTR. So once again, we are relating MRI-derived properties, which are pretty much easy to get. It's a magnetic resonance sequence. It takes 30 minutes. But we are obtaining information on the cellular level, which has never been done before. So a quick summary. We had MRI scans from adolescents, roughly 300 adolescents at visit 1, 14 years of age, 200 at visit 2, 19 years of age, and we detected signals of change in MTR as significant with intracortical myelination, and MTR alone as signals from dendritic arbor. This is unique because, once again, we are getting these signals that are microscopic in property, and these are completely different and separate cellular compartments, yet we are still detecting them just from a simple MRI scan. So the one take-home point is virtual histology may provide insights regarding the underlying neurobiology of MRI-derived metrics. So with this, we have future plans to apply this methodology to a variety of different neurodevelopmental, psychiatric, and even possibly neurodegenerative diseases. For example, autism spectrum disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, epilepsy, etc. We're going to be working with the Enigma Consortium in collaboration. And thank you for your time. I would like to acknowledge my supervisor and the imaging study as well as collaborators.
I wanted to point out too, just that these paintings were done by the children at Bloorview School and were donated to us by Bloorview School. So thank you to them. And thank you, Yash.
Beautiful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sorry about dendritic arbor.
No worries. It's dendritic arbor. It's common. It's common language, right? Everyone says it.
Thank you, Yash. I just wanted to reiterate Bev's earlier comments about the hope that the new generation of scientists bring. So truly a natural. I think you could even sell iPhones and such a... So allow me to explain briefly the proceedings from this point forward. The agenda in your program will be very helpful to ensure that you don't miss the subsequent proceedings. First, there will be concurrent sessions in different areas of the hospital. In the next few minutes, everyone who has signed up for a breakout session, you'll be asked to please move to the respective rooms. The room number for the breakout session, for which you have signed up for, is on the back of your badge. The breakout sessions will conclude at 12 p.m., at which point a hot lunch will be available in the cafeteria. Following lunch, kindly make your way to the atrium for our annual poster session. This year we have 55 posters on display, prepared and presented by scientists, clinicians, trainees, and families. We encourage you to visit as many posters as possible. Please also vote for your favorite poster. The People's Choice Award has been part of the BRI Symposium since 2012. The process is simple. First, pick your favorite poster and tell us why you think it's impactful, and the winners will receive a gift card. There will be a ballot box where you can submit your votes. Following the poster session, there will be a special dance performance by Luca Lazy Legs Patvelli in the center of the atrium. We're excited to welcome Luca to Holland Bloorview. He's joining us from Montreal, and so be sure to line up early as the spots around the dance stage will fill up fast. Finally, a reminder to please visit Telling My Tale if you haven't had the chance already at the art gallery outside. It will remain open until 6 p.m. To help me navigate through the various locations, there will be volunteers and staff with a black ribbon on their badge who will be happy to direct you. And they can also answer any questions you may have. Please be reminded to tweet using our hashtag, and also, which is also on your cover, on the cover of your symposium program. And then finally, after Luca's performance, please rejoin us here in the conference center for the popular and much sought after lived experience keynote, which will be delivered this year by the one and only Emily Chan. So at this point, I'd ask you to make your way to the breakout sessions. Thank you.